This is the DRS Sports Podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. Now, after a minor setback, we're here trying to bounce back after an 0-2 record on our last pod, but we're still clicking at 36-28 against the spread during the play-in / playoffs, and a whopping 48-32-1 against the spread record overall for my NBA picks this season on the DRS Sports Podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube page so that you never miss out on our expert betting analysis. We switch to the West, and a 119-109 victory by the Mavs in Game 4. They get on the board in the series. Warriors lead 3-1. Game 5 goes Thursday in Golden State. Warriors favored by 7 points. I'm going to be on the Warriors. And, I said once they went up 3-0, like the series is a wrap. Give the Mavs credit for not folding and getting a win at home. A very weird game with like the roof leaking and a huge delay before the start of the third quarter, which was super weird. But much like the Celtics going home in Game 6 with a chance to clinch and advance to the NBA Finals, I'd be stunned if the Warriors lost this game at home with a chance to go to the NBA Finals, right? Like, I don't know which crowd is going to be more fired up to get back to the finals, because it's been, an interesting ride for both franchises and fan bases and organizations. But the playoffs have just been a theme of blowouts. So I'm not even afraid of a Warriors -7, just because a theme that I've talked about a lot is when the Warriors win, they win by a lot. And so I think they're going to win this game. I look at, go on.
No, I was just going to say, well, like the theme is when anybody wins, they win by a lot, right?
For sure.
So you're right. Like you don't have to be afraid of laying points if you believe one team is going to win or the other, right? And it doesn't really matter how evenly matched they are. Like, again, like there's just kind of no reason to be like, because again, you win, you're going to cover like that. Or listen, that's not in any way, and it should be mentioned, that's not in any way predictive going forward. But how many times on a night-to-night basis are we just going to bang our head against the wall here, going like, oh yeah, we weren't going to get a close game between two teams that were 4 or 5 point spread, where the spread mattered. In this case, like I can't. If you like the Warriors, then yeah, go for it, because again, people talk about the 3-point shooting variance, like. Yeah, could very well be a blowout or at least a comfortable victory, or they could be tied with 5 minutes to go and still win by 10 points. Like that, there's no reason to be afraid of laying the points necessarily.
Yeah, and like the Warriors, what happened from my perspective in Game 4, essentially, I mean, yeah, obviously the Warriors wanted to win the game. Obviously, you're trying to win the game, but Kerr, I mean. I'm not going to get into like his speech and what he was talking about before the game. Like, we'll keep it to basketball on this like gambling pod, but you could tell my guy was kind of on a different vibe and even said as much as this game doesn't really matter. And then in the first half, he was throwing out lineups with like Moses Moody, Kuminga, and Poole all on the floor at the same time in the first quarter of a game or first half of a game that was like in the balance with a chance to clinch. I'm not saying they're throwing the game, but I'm saying there's a lot of tinkering going on, that there's a longer leash, we'll say, with a lot of his young guys and rookies, which is not normal to what he was doing for the rest of the playoffs at all. And they kept it close, they kept it close. They still had a chance to win. Then it got kind of out of hand. He let the kids rock for the majority of the fourth quarter, and the kids almost brought them back to the point where the starters had to check back into the game because they were down. I think they cut it to like 13. Like they had a chance to actually like make it a game. They got it to under 10. Right. So the Warriors, not much happened in that game that like deterred me off of the main thought process of what's been going on in this series. I mean, the Mavs hit threes at home in like a less pressurized situation, because you're down 3-0, right? And Finney Smith's hitting 4 threes. Bullock hit 6 threes. Kleber and Dinwiddie with multiple threes as well. The shots fell for them, which, as I said, you can do that, but can you do it on the road and in a more pressurized situation? I don't think so. But yeah, Warriors -7. That's kind of where I'm going to be on that one. Good job, good effort, Mavs. I think it's good when a team gets to end their home season with the win in front of their crowd. They had a good season overall. good job, good effort. You know, you go to Golden State and get blown out. Nobody's going to be mad at you.
Yeah, and all that stuff is absolutely true and very legitimately possible. And we talked about this, you know, before the last game. And again, I didn't want anything to do with the Warriors in that game because of just the mentality in that. And because, as you mentioned, right, like the Mavs aren't some team that are just dying to get the season over with, whether it's because of injury or just strife. Yeah. Right. When a team gets swept, a lot of times it's because of one of those two things, right? Either they're just unmanned relative to their sort of normal state, or whether their normal state, you know, is, or should say they are uninterested relative to their normal state, right? Like that we should have some expectation, you know, picture the Sixers, picture the Nets, something along those lines, right? Where the expectation is never actually met during the season and they realize that they are just not good enough, right? And so and Dallas just is not that, right? There is hope for Dallas in the future, if you will, right? There is reason to be excited. So all of that stuff, by and large, now is, you know, frankly, pretty narrative based, because right now we have 192 minutes of basketball between these two teams over the course of 4 games. And the Mavs, you mentioned the Mavs shot well, and that's why they won. They won by 10 points. And the game was, you know, again, once you get to the fourth quarter and that game was, you know, 20-point game and the benches are emptied and all of that sort of thing, it's yet another effective blowout. Right now, the bench guys sort of got that weirdly close. I think they cut it to like 8 with a couple of minutes to go. But the point is, right, like Dallas won that game comfortably. And you and I talked about like the shot quality elements of, okay, like the Warriors win by this many, but what was the shot quality, or, you know, the comeback obviously in game 2, all of that sort of thing. And that the Mavs played better than anybody's giving them credit for. They just didn't make their shots, but they made them this time around. But nothing really changed. It works both ways, right? Nothing really changed from a shot quality standpoint. The shot quality was 117 to 116. That was a 1-point game from a shot quality standpoint. And so again, maybe it's because, as we talked about on Monday's show, whether it's, you know, call it whatever you want, right? Clutch, pressurized. I really like that term. Like if it was you know, there was no pressure in the building for the Mavericks to make these shots, then they make them, then yeah, like that's going to be a problem for the Mavs going forward. But if it was just a matter of variance, that over the course of 192 minutes, you get, you know, 100 plus 3-pointers, there's going to be streaks where you shoot 60%. There are going to be streaks where you shoot 30%. That's just how numbers work. And so I'm looking at these shot quality numbers, and I'll go game by game for you. Game 1, Mavericks 107, Warriors 105. Game 2, Mavericks 114, Warriors 112. Game 3, Mavericks 110, Warriors 100. Game 4, 117 to 116, as I mentioned. And so over the course of 192 minutes, the average score of these games from a shot quality creation and shot quality defense standpoint are Mavs 112, Warriors 108.25. And so, like, yes, the Warriors might just have that clutch, might just have that ability to shoot in pressurized situations, and the Mavs might not have that. And if that's going to be why the Warriors cover this game, I'm content with that. But we have gotten enough of a sample size, like you just talked about with Miami and Boston, like seeing the matchup. And again, we are a pretty epic collapse from the Mavericks away from this being just a 2-2 series going back to Golden State. And if that doesn't happen, now you can easily say, listen, like whether you want to besmirch the Mavs or whether you want to give credit to the Warriors, like the reality is that did happen. But we were at a point where you could live bet the Warriors at a pretty considerable price. And so if everybody was so convinced that the Warriors were going to make that comeback, they're welcome to show me the tickets on the live money line. But the reality is like a lot of people in that third quarter were like, wow, the Mavs are going to steal this game. Or I shouldn't even say steal, because they were just a better team for the majority of that game. But because you want to assign a narrative to it, right? Like they got too excited, they got whatever, they thought they had that game won, whatever you want to sort of say to it. The point is that the Mavericks could have won that game. And if they had, I shouldn't say should have won that game. And if they had, we'd be looking at a 2-2 series. And if we're looking at a 2-2 series on that big board up there, that's a lot more attributable to this shot quality, right? Like those two things would make a lot more sense. A shot quality that has had 3 of the 4 games be within 2 points would make a lot of sense for a 2-2 series. So unfortunately for the Mavericks, they're not going to win this series because it was 3-0. Of course, now 3-1. But that's really just on a quarter and a half of basketball. And so over the course of, 16 quarters, these teams are creating the same amount of shots, the same quality of shots, I should say, to essentially get the same amount of points. In fact, obviously the Mavericks with actually a little bit better. Now, again, all that could go out the window because the Warriors, could have that killer instinct, all of those cliches that we use, right? And the Mavs could not have that, they could just be content with that one win. You had Luka sort of not making excuses, but sort of saying like, listen, I'm young. There's going to be plenty of, times ahead of me, blah, blah, blah. They might not show up for the game and the Warriors might have that killer instinct and this might completely flip. But all I can do is look at what happens during a season, what happens during a postseason, and what happens during this series and go, okay, like what makes sense to me from a mathematical standpoint, right? Like based on the analytics of play. And I'm not the one in charge of doing the math or evaluating these shots, right? I'm going to rely on others to do that. And so I look at it and I go, this line opened at 7.5 and it's down to 7 because I looked at 7.5 and I was like, well, like just we can't have gone up, right? Because we've gone from 5 in game 1 to 6.5 in game 2. And now we're in game 5 and we're going up. And there just isn't anything in the play that would show me or tell me that the spread needs to be higher other than the final scores of some of these games. But that's the point. That's what we're supposed to be doing as bettors. We're supposed to be looking deeper than the final score. And so that's what we're doing here. And we're going, the final score of that game 2, where the Warriors managed to cover that game despite being down like 20 points in the second half. Like, that's a misleading final score. And the series at 3-1 is a misleading tally right now. And so if that's the case, then I'm sort of obligated to bet on Dallas +7 in this game and sort of let the chips fall where they may. Because I did that in game 2. And unfortunately, right, the chips didn't just fall. They sat on their side and they spun around and they waited like it was, the thimble in what's the Leo DiCaprio movie where at the time with the time travel? Well, you're blanking on it hard. Inception. Yes, I got it. It's like an Inception situation, right? Where it's like, okay, like eventually the thimble, or it's not a thimble. What is it? The spindle? I don't even know. Point is, eventually the chips are going to fall one way or another. And I just think that the Warriors have been. It's funny. You can't assign the word lucky to a team like the Warriors with the pedigree that the Warriors have, because you sound like a crazy person, because like, oh, it's the Warriors, like they've won all these titles. But isn't that kind of the point too? Because if the shots are falling for the Warriors, we brush this off as like the Warriors being notably superior. But when they're not falling, we just sort of chalk it up to 3-point making variance. Like we go, oh yeah, Dallas like hit all their threes. And it's like, yeah, or they're just taking turns at this point, like creating offense and creating shots that are going to accumulate an expected amount of points. And 3 times it's gone the Warriors' way and 1 time it's gone Dallas's way, despite the fact that these games are being played relatively evenly. And it's possible that Dallas over the course of 6 games is going to have an even amount of wins to the Warriors. And honestly, if they won this game, it would be really hard to not bet them to win game 6 back in Dallas. And so I just look at it and I go, I have to acknowledge the fact that like these games on average are 112, 108 for the Mavericks. And because they haven't hit shots, and I understand why anyone would believe that like the Mavericks aren't going to make shots in the next game. That's entirely, as we've seen, a great possibility, if not probability. But for me here, like, and honestly, the other thing with regards to the point spread is like, yes, I have to take the +7, but I also have to take the money line in this because we're getting +245 at this point. We have gotten out to a +245 in games that are effectively coin flips. And the coin flip isn't like who's going to get the last basket in the way that we think a lot of coin flip basketball games are, right? We think of hockey, game goes to overtime. Okay, this was a coin flip game. Basketball, oh, this went, tie game, 5 seconds to go, inbound play, like that's a coin flip game. Unfortunately for the NBA, and the reason these games are all blowouts, is the coin flip happens essentially before the game, or sort of throughout the game, where who is going to shoot 45% from three and who's going to shoot 35% from three, because so many 3-pointers are going up that relatively small difference ends up being like a 25-point difference on the scoreboard if you're hitting 7 extra threes, 8 extra threes. But honestly, that's just a coin flip situation too, because all of these teams effectively shoot the exact same from a long-term perspective, right? Like the Mavericks aren't notably worse. I don't even think they are worse from a 3-point shooting standpoint than the Warriors. And yeah, the Warriors get easier 2-point baskets, but there's a reason analytics exists, because the 3-pointer, obviously you can shoot a worse percentage shooting threes than the other team who's shooting a better percentage shooting twos and still win the game. So it all comes out in the wash as these 2-point games. These games should be 2-point games, but because of 3-point variance, they're not. And so instead of the close NBA playoff basketball that you and I are used to from the 90s and the 2000s, or heck, last season, we're getting these drastic variance things that are, we're not getting sweeps. We're getting 5, 6, 7 game series that are all blowouts. Or in the case of, remember, Memphis and Minnesota, you get halves that are blowouts. Minnesota would have a 20-point victory in the first half. Memphis would have a 20-point victory in the second half. And all of that is just shooting variance. But when you come into the game and both teams essentially shoot the same from the 3-pointer or from a combination of 3 and 2, which is what shot quality is, these games are all coin flips. And if I'm getting plus 245 on a coin flip, you know, if we're going to start flipping coins right now and you're telling me I'm getting plus 245 on tails, like heads can come up 10 straight times and plus 245 on tails is still a good bet. And so I have to keep betting on the Mavericks here and sort of take it. And by the way, if the Mavericks win one game as plus 245 underdogs, that covers literally 2.5 other losses, right? And again, maybe we don't see that. And again, maybe the Warriors win, maybe the Warriors cover, maybe they win by 20, who knows? But just from a strictly betting standpoint, betting obviously being different than just picking games and sort of, you know, basic level type stuff, plus 245 just has to be a bet. And it's not comfortable because it's plus 245. And frankly, it's probably going to lose. But this isn't a 3-1 series. This isn't even Boston-Miami, where you put the shot quality matchup there, because Boston has a better shot quality score by a mile than the Warriors do. But we still have to go to a game 6 because of variance and weird stuff happening, and obviously the injuries and stuff that have made that a really weird series to try to predict. We haven't had the injuries. We know what we're going to get from these teams, at least from a health standpoint, who's going to take the shots, who's going to get the minutes. And again, a lot of it comes down to Reggie Bullock and Bertans and Maxi Kleber. And sometimes they shoot well and sometimes they don't. In game 3 on the road, they shot well. They should have won that game. In game 4, they didn't at all. And so they didn't. Game 5, they were back, or excuse me, game 4, they were back at home and they shot well. In game 3, they didn't. Point is, like, if I'm getting plus 245, then I just have to rely on the Bullocks, the Bertans, the Klebers to hit those shots and maybe just be a little bit better defensively so that it isn't just an absolute layup line for the Warriors. But I get the concept, right? Like there's a reason why the Warriors lost that game from a sort of a motivational standpoint, but it was also one of their better games from a shot quality creation standpoint. And yeah, a lot of those shots are being taken by guys who aren't that good, but that's built into the shot quality numbers. So like, it's not a comfortable spot, but yeah, I got to take Dallas plus 7 and plus 245 to win this game and force a game 6.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Right. And it's just interesting to discuss and the sort of the narratives around betting and also just talking about the games. And I think it's important too, for people to understand the difference between like, making bets based solely on the numbers and then making bets based off like, you know, adding in the basketball stuff and all that, right? Because there is a logic to it when you're talking about probabilities and odds, and the numbers will tell you, you have to make this bet because blank percent of the time there's a chance you win, and then that covers this and that, right? So like, totally understand that. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that side of it as well. Cause like the basketball side of it, it's so funny because it kind of goes like not counter to that, but I think it's more so, you know, a deeper discussion in the sense that, you know, when people say things like, oh, you just need a basket, right? Like, can you get a basket? And then that's where, you know, the shot quality and the shot variance becomes so strange. And you have like, you know, you get pitted on these sides because you hear the old coaches who are covering a game and they'll say things like, wait a second, that's a 3-on-1 fast break. Why the hell is this guy running to the 3-point line? And that's a terrible shot. And no one will be able to convince me otherwise that is a bad shot, right? Like you take a layup, right?
Yeah.
But that's like at the crux of what this discussion is, right? Because it's like good shots and bad shots and, you know, how you're able to define, you know, something like that. Like, yes, you can always look at numbers and say, hey, the probability of this shot going in, he shoots 40% and it's cool and it makes total sense. And I get it, but it's so funny because the playoffs and basketball has always been about like, who can get a bucket when you need a bucket. Right.
But you know what, though? The problem is none of these games are coming down to needing a bucket. And
it's not about winning a bucket at the end of the game. It's like perfect example. Go back to the Kawhi run with the Raps, right? So you're down 10 points, right? You're down 10 points. You need a bucket to keep the game close. It's not just about like needing a bucket to win the game.
You can need a bucket whenever at that point, though.
Of course you can. Yeah. But that's why like we talk about Chris Paul in different contexts and we talk about other point guards, right? Like how do you manage the game? And I'm talking prime Chris Paul, not this Chris Paul, but like, how do you
Chris Paul that won all those titles?
No, come on. Like, how do you manage a game, right? Is more so what I'm talking about, right? And so like, there are just points in a game where it's getting close, or how do you extend a lead from like 5 points to 10 points, 10 points to 15 points, like those little things that like aren't really like, there's not a stat to quantify that. But when you're a team and you're the Warriors and Steph knows, okay, I got to stop this run. Let me just get a foul here so I can get to the free throw line. But there's not a stat to quantify how he takes that lead from 10 to 15. Do you know what I mean? Like those things don't exist. And that to me is the beauty of these discussions, because there is no like actual right answer is what I'm saying. That's all. Like all I'm saying is like the stats will tell you, the stats are part of the story, but the beauty of it is that we're still talking about humans, right? And so there are things that make these things different than like 40% from this guy isn't 40% from the other guy.
Yeah, that's the debate. And if you've decided that 2 points at the start of the fourth quarter is more valuable than 3 points in the first quarter, then like, I'm not going to be able to talk you out of that. Right. Like it's like a lot of other things in life. Like if you're going to die on that vine, like that's fine. But my point is like these fourth quarters are so boring. And so like, they're just not, we've gotten to a point where they're just not competitive because it's already a 20-point game. It's because of the accumulation of the first three quarters and what teams are doing to be efficient. Right. And it isn't like one possession, it's literally hundreds of possessions back and forth. And so if you are getting a 0.1 points per possession advantage over the course of 3 possessions, well, like that's vulnerable. You're not, like that hole can get punched through. But if you're getting a 0.1 point per possession advantage over the course of 100 possessions, like that is how you stretch a lead, right? By consistently taking good shots. Now, good shot doesn't have to be the 3-pointer on the 3-on-1 fast break. The problem I think there is like, are you taking a contested layup, or are you able to pass, well enough that you're getting like the wide open layup? Because wide open 3 is a better shot than contested layup. The issue is we should be able to get ourselves a wide open layup on a 3-on-1.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right? Like, no, but that's exactly the point, right?
Right. Yeah. And so like, okay, but if all we're doing in the sort of, I'll call it the Steph Curry era of basketball, is practicing 3-pointers and practicing wide open 3-pointers off of the fast break, the calculus becomes a little bit different, right? Because if you spent 10 years of your basketball, or your entire, like if you go from age 15 to age 25, where all you're practicing on a 3-on-1 fast break is spotting up for a three, getting a wide open three, something that an NBA player is going to hit at like a 75% rate. And you're practicing that instead of
75%,
like wide open 3-pointer for a Steph Curry.
I don't
think Steph Curry's making a wide open. Steph Curry's making a wide open.
How many people are Steph Curry? And that's kind of my point.
Well,
right?
Steph Curry's making it like 100% of the time. Like I'm
my
like a wide open.
Not everyone is Steph
three.
Curry, and that's kind of the problem, right?
Right, but like you're also assuming that layup is going to be 100%, and that's just not the case, right? It's like you're making assumptions that 2 points guaranteed versus like whatever percent you want to put it, even if it's 65%, like that's still a 65% 3-point shot is the same value as a 100% 2-point shot. They are both worth 2 points in expected value. And that doesn't do you any good on the last shot of the game if you can guarantee yourself 2 points, but we're not ever getting to the last shot of the game. That's not the NBA anymore. We are only getting accumulations of plays over and over and over again. And then eventually the team that's making 0.1 per, point per possession, a lot of P's in there. Those are the teams that are winning these games. And we also don't know which team it's going to be before that game starts, right? It is essentially just kind of up to, honestly, shot variance, and whether those shot variances are layups or whether they're 3-pointers, right? Like if the layup, that uncontested or semi-contested layup, or however you want to put it, because like defenders on those fast breaks, like they know, okay, I can only guard one thing. And you're taught from a young age, like I'm going to guard the rim here, right? Whoever's going to take this shot isn't going to do so with an uncontested layup. I'll give up an uncontested 5-footer. I'll give up an uncontested 10-footer. I have to give up a uncontested 3-pointer in this situation. So like, you're not getting 2 points guaranteed ever in this situation, because by the way, if a guy's even within reach, he's going to foul you, at which point, like, yes, you get 2 free throws, but you know what else isn't guaranteed? Free throws. So you're only going to get, on average, a 75% free throw shooter is on average going to get 1.5 points for that. So, okay. So now if the choice is a guy getting fouled to get 1.5 points on average versus a guy getting a wide open 3, well, what's a wide open 3 for 1.5 points? It's 50%. Now I'm here to tell you the guy who is going to spot up for that 3-point shot, wide open again, having practiced it for 10 years, because that's the way we play basketball now in the Steph Curry era. That's a better than 50% shot. So like, that's where the math comes in. If you're hitting 55% on that wide open shot over the course of time, that's a better play than getting fouled and going to the basket, or like going to the basket, getting fouled for 2 shots. Like that's where the math comes in. And the accumulation over in a 24-second shot clock over 3 quarters with all the possessions back and forth, that's what's leading to these 15, 20-point games after 3 quarters. So the idea of like, just give it to Kevin Durant, he's going to get us a bucket to win the game at the end, becomes moot. And that's the point. That's why all of these teams, because the 5 teams in the NBA that have that dude, whether it's LeBron, Kevin Durant, even Luka Doncic, like those guys who are going to get you the game-winning basket under like triple team, like complete chaos at the end, all the other 25 teams are going like, honestly, let's get this game over with one way or another, but by 3 quarters. Like that, like let's find our advantage in the first quarter at 0.1 points per possession. PPP is what I'm calling it from here on in. Let's accumulate that over 3 quarters so that we don't have to deal with Kawhi at the end of a basketball game, because now his mid-range shot getting to his spot becomes the difference between winning and losing. They don't want to have to deal with LeBron, Kawhi, Luka, Durant, etc., Steph Curry at the end of games. They want to be able to find their advantages with the second team, with how they play in general. And that's why we're getting these 15 to 20 point. It's not because the advent of the 3-point line. The 3-point lines existed for 30 years. It's not necessarily that kids are practicing 3-pointers, though that obviously helps with regards to strategy. And that's why the Warriors were advanced, right? That's why they went to 5 straight and NBA finals. It wasn't just like, hey, your players are better than our players. It certainly helped that they deployed that while having those dudes who can get that basket at the end of the game. But like 2 points in the third quarter isn't any better than 2 points in the first quarter. And like, that's the thing that people have to understand when it comes to betting these games. Now, again, if you pile up a ton of 2s over in that third quarter or in any quarter, like, yeah, it's going to work out for you. And I don't know that there's anything Dallas can do to stop the Warriors from piling up the 2s the way that the Warriors do basic, like, I shouldn't say basic, but like traditional quality basketball things, moving the basketball, right? Dribble penetration, passing the ball, kicking out, getting good matchups, all of that stuff. But there is a stat for that. All of that stuff is built into it. And so whether you decide to do 3-point shooting contests like the Mavericks, or whether you decide to do like the pretty version of basketball, if it all comes out in the wash at the end to be a close game, then like there's obviously 2 ways to do it. Now, the problem is on a game-to-game basis, one team is going to make more and the other team's not. Because honestly, any basketball game, whether it's college or pro, just look at the shooting. And you're going to know without looking at the scoreboard who won the game, because everything else by and large is pretty equal. I mean, even the Celtics had like 30 more free throw attempts than the Heat did the other night, and they lost the game. And so like fundamentally, it just comes down to like, did you make shots? And that's what this game's going to come down to. And the Warriors are going to cover this game. It's because they made shots. The Mavericks are going to cover or win this game outright. It's because they made shots. Now I can say like, I don't really believe that the Bertans, Kleber, Bullock crew is going to make shots this game. And you know what? Like, maybe I'm right and maybe I'm wrong and we'll see. But like, the point is like, we've played 4 games in this series and 2 of them, those guys have made shots and 2 of them, they haven't. And if you're going to give me plus 245, unfortunately for me, I have to put my faith in those 3 guys to have the 2 games, the 2 good games versus the 2 bad games. Right. That's just a bankroll management betting sort of, that's kind of basic, right? Like I just have to do that. I'm not loving it. I wish it was 3 guys who I felt better about hitting shots in sort of pressurized situations and on the road. But like, it could be worse, I suppose. It could be guys who have literally never done it. So I just got to do it.
Yeah, no, I totally hear where you're coming from. I totally understand the math angle of it. I just love the narrative of the conversation of where we believe that there's a stat to tell us literally everything. And like we remove the human element out of it sometimes, right? And like that basketball 3-on-1 break, like you'll never be able to convince me that running
that's what I said.
3-point line is
the
right thing, because like there's no stat to account the difference between the shot quality of like Kyle Lowry being the one who mostly it is going to be a guard who's the one that's the first one back at the break. So like that's a contested shot, but it's a different level of a contested shot because the guy's like 5 feet. Do you know what I mean? Like he's Kyle Lowry as opposed to Bam. So like there's a different level. It's like, yeah, it's a contested shot. But is it? You know, most of those guys are standing there trying to take a charge, right? And not really contesting the shot. So it's very interesting, right? So it's just an interesting like back and forth. And like I love the fact that there are multiple ways to look at the same thing. And that's what makes sports to me anyways.
Yeah. And honestly, like while people are busy having this conversation on regular, you know, mainstream, if you will, like sports shows and being like, why are there so many blowouts? It's like, I just explained it for people. Like, that's why that's what it is.
I think,
and it's like, but they're going to
like, it's the 3-point.
Oh, the people who are listening to this, get it. Cause this is a pretty smart audience, right? It's the people who like, it's the, you know, I don't want to call out specific shows or whatever, but like, they're going to just sit there and they're gonna be like, oh, no, like, this sucks. And like, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, unfortunately that's just the nature of this game. And like, it's probably going to continue to be that way. And we're going to get like, it'll be way flukier when there's the close game, because honestly, like the way all of this works, it should be fluky that a game after 200 possessions, so to speak, like comes down to like, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of crazy that like teams that are scoring 100 points each would ever come down to a 1 or 2 point game. Like, that's kind of nuts, right? Like, but because we were going 2 points at a time for a really long time, we were getting games that were going to be coming down to that, right? Like, we're getting plenty of games that are quote unquote close games that are 8, 9, 10 point games. And that's what I mean by, like, you shouldn't be afraid to lay the points if you think a team is going to win, because we might actually have a close game that finishes with an 8, 9, or 10 point spread, the way that we did in game 3.
Yeah. No, totally makes sense. And looking at that, our next couple games going on there, as mentioned, I'm going to be on in English. Game 6 going to be on Boston. What's the spread there? -7, and then -9. Pardon me. Going to be on Boston -9 in game 6 on Friday, and on Thursday, game 5. It's going to be Warriors -7 for me. That would mean we have a very long layoff until next Thursday, which would be when the NBA Finals would be set to start. I'm pretty sure it's June 2nd.
June 2nd. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, if we're talking Celtics Warriors, you could talk me into that playoff series for sure, NBA Finals series for sure. That'd be super interesting.